Hello, welcome everybody. My name's Samantha McCabe. I'm the National Chair for Women in Property and also the Passive House Lead for WSP in the UK. So thank you for coming to join us here this afternoon, and thanks very much to the Bradford team for hosting us at Mumtaz. So last autumn, Women in Property and Women in Architecture got together and decided that we needed to do something together. And so specifically around the backlash against equality, diversion and inclusion and what's happening in EDI. Polarised by US politics has led us to both increased scrutiny and strategic retreat from EDI initiatives, and we're a wee bit worried, to be totally frank with you. So cancellation of any reference to sustainability, social and climate related, creating a fragmented and often cautious landscape for equality, equity, diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to hand you over to Anna.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna Ifante. I'm Vice Chair of Women in Architecture and also Global Operations Director at NN. And continuing on from what Sam was saying, at the same time as diminishing the conversation around EDI, what we have found out through the various events that we're organizing within the Women in Property and Women in Architecture circles is that a lot of the male colleagues appear to become more and more disenfranchised from the workplace, and they're weary of saying the wrong thing amongst their female counterparts, and as a result, they're choosing to stay silent. Worse still, on a day-to-day basis, for those who are parents of young boys, everyone agrees that boys are struggling to make sense of where they belong increasingly, leading to growing misogyny and confusion. So we decided to put the question out to the public, to our members, to our colleagues and collaborators, and ask the question leading up to the event, opening up the conversation to people who may not be able to be here with us today and share in person. And that question was, when talking about gender, do you ever choose to stay silent because you're worried about saying something that might unintentionally cause offense? And the results, as of 3:30 p.m., were 22 no's and 18 yeses. So, taking a pause to reflect on that, I will now hand you over to Dana Walker, our moderator, who will introduce to you our amazing panel. We're all immensely proud to have you here, so thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Dana.
Thanks so much. Thank you. And applause to you as well for organising all of this, you and all of the team. It's an absolute pleasure to be moderating this discussion today. My name is Dana Walker. I'm the CEO of something called Built by Us. I'm a former electrician and architect, and that journey was quite revealing in terms of some of the challenges that we face across this industry. So I'm so pleased to be hosting this conversation today. This discussion is going to be quite different perhaps from some of the ones you've been to before. We're doing a kind of modified fishbowl. So we have a panel, a fantastic panel. Thank you all for joining us. But we also have some people who will be joining the panel. So they will be joining the fifth chair. And as an audience member, you have an opportunity to join the panel as well, should you wish to. And that will be the sixth chair, which is the one at the end. Thank you so much, Sam, for showing where the sixth chair is. So that's how it's going to work. We're going to keep the conversation flowing, but there are opportunities to interact. We have the most amazing panel. I'm actually going to ask them to introduce themselves, just to give a kind of one-liner about who you are. And I'm going to start with Lee. That's all right.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Lee Chambers, CEO of Male Allies UK. We do research to understand how men engage in inclusion, the skills around allyship and how they're built. And also we do a lot of research with teenage boys to understand their world and how they're interacting with technology, relationships, friendships and spaces to take that into public policy making.
Hello, I'm Jo Shepherd from Mansa Architects, and I'm their Business Development Manager and pusher of all things EDI everywhere I work.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Stephen O'Malley. I'm the Chief Exec of Civic. We're a design consultancy in the built environment, and the nucleus of our offer is typically civil and structural and transport engineering, so professions that are more typically associated with male heritage. More on that, I'm sure.
Hello everyone, my name is Muyiwa Oki. I'm a chartered architect and a project manager currently working at Mace. For a couple of years, I won the seat of the presidency of the Royal Institute of British Architects. And I won that on a platform of equity, diversity and inclusion, and ensuring younger people and younger diverse people want and can access a career in architecture.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you all for those introductions. So let's get started with our first question. This question is about the context that we're in and how the political landscape has changed. We heard in the introduction what's happening in the US and also what's happening in the UK, particularly following those local elections. So how is politics influencing the perceived value of EDI? And I'd like to go to Stephen first.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt about it. The political backdrop at the moment is scary and intimidating and clearly concerning. But actually, there was an interview between David Olagolsa, probably the very famous historian that's probably more broadly known for his role on the traitors. Yes, thank you. But he interviewed Barack Obama, and one of the lines from that interview that always stuck with me from Barack Obama was that progress is rarely linear, and over time, what we will experience is oscillations across what we hope and believe to be an upward trending line. And if we take the current backdrop of politics at the minute as an unfortunate trough, and it will bounce back, and it will come back. From a personal perspective, in terms of that topic and those themes, the business that I run has 250 people in it. We purposely seek out diversity because that's where the creativity is, and the challenges and the issues that we're faced with as a society are not going to be solved with the same people that got us into this position. So we need a broader range of voices to help us deal with those issues. So I think that's where the real value is ultimately harnessed and mined.
Thank you so much for that. Muyiwa, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I had to agree with Stephen there, but I'll add on to that, to saying perhaps we also need to come together and understand where the direction of travel is, where do we want to go, and if we all agree that the direction of travel is we want more diverse and more inclusive, equitable spaces, like Stephen says, the zigzag, the peaks and trough will happen, but the confidence in all of us, so the people who believe that we need more diverse, we thrive in diverse communities, will be able to encourage the next generation, my generation and younger ones, that we shouldn't leave the fight, we shouldn't just give up the fight.
Really important points there about sort of future-proofing our industry and really thinking about what comes next in terms of what the next generation will be expecting and needing. Sam, do you have anything you'd like to add?
One of the largest issues that we've come across is that the lack of knowledge at school age, at school with teachers, and them understanding routes into specifically the construction industry and understanding what they can use their maths class and their English class for, and the diverse range of roles there are in the construction industry. It's not all about getting your hands dirty on site and laying bricks, although that's quite lucrative, or being a plumber. But there is a lot of different roles in this industry, and I feel like we need to break down a few barriers at high school and help teach the teachers about what is out there and what they could find, because that's what's going to drive people into this industry and get more inclusion, just generally more engagement from the younger generation.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to ask for the mic to be passed to Jo.
Hello. Yeah, it's tricky at the moment. It's exhausting, and the people who are supposed to be looking after our needs are driving this awful narrative that's enabling people that have fought against EDI for years and years and years. They now feel vindicated because certain governments think that it's something that's not important and not necessary. And it absolutely is. But I do feel there's a massive groundswell of younger people who will, from a retaining staff point of view, it's something they'll insist on. They'll look for people, diverse people on boards. They'll look at how many senior people are in place. And it's all really, really important that we continue to push for this and not tire of the fight. It's not a linear thing. It's just peaks and troughs, as everyone said, but we do need, at the moment, it's a particularly deep trough. And we do need to be stronger to push the elephant up the hill a bit more. Yeah.
Very good points. And this is something, as you said in your introduction, that you're kind of looking at in terms of a data set research. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your feelings are on this subject, about how the politics is kind of affecting what you're seeing on the ground, Lee.
Yes, I think in some ways I'm in a unique position. I spent the past 5 months interviewing CEOs, male CEOs of FTSE 350 and the 50 biggest private companies in the UK to understand their perspectives on gender balance. Very rarely they've been asked those questions by another man and created the safety for them to actually be transparent about what they think. But to answer the wider question, if we think about the geopolitical climate, organisations with really close proximity to US government contracts have had in some ways a decision to make around moral courage. Are they going to continue to stand for what they've been talking about for all these years, or are they going to step back? Some have stepped back, some have continued, some have rebranded this work, but are still doing the work. And I think here in the UK, yes, there is a proximity to the US, but actually there's also a proximity to Europe, where this is actually becoming something that in the current wins, organisations are actually finding ways to collaborate more effectively to ensure that we do survive and in some ways thrive through these challenging times. In terms of the statistics, there's as many men sat up here as there is sat in the audience. Like, I'll be brutally honest, it's really important that we think about how we reach everyone in this conversation. While I've been interviewing CEOs, I also spend a good chunk of my life sat on sites interviewing people who think inclusion is a load of woke nonsense on offshore oil rigs with travelling logistics teams to understand how can this be applicable and meaningful for them. Because what we found in our research is that 41% of men we interviewed said they thought this had all gone a bit too far. And that's how they felt. And 51% felt scared about getting it wrong for a number of different reasons. So those are some of the things that we're actively tackling through our work to actually meet men where they're at, show them that actually when this happens, it's a win-win. More gender equal societies benefit men significantly. And when men build these skills, they also are really powerful, not just for inclusion, but how they navigate their everyday life, conversations with partners, how they manage clients, and for many different things. So moving away from inclusion to a skill set that everyone can build and thinking how we do support people to find commonality in a world where people fear difference, but also highlight just how powerful difference is when we bring it together.
Wonderful. And if I can just bring in Nathan, when we were sort of preparing for this, we were talking about how businesses are reacting. Is there anything that you'd like to share in terms of that conversation?
Yeah, I think we're uniquely positioned in terms of we've got a diversity charter, have done since inception. If people buy over a certain amount of tickets, we make 70% of them can be for men, 30% have to be for women. We have had pushback initially on it, and everything's kind of changed. And actually, what we've heard internally is actually really positive from them, saying actually it gave us a leverage to go back to them and say, no, it's if there's senior males in the business, actually that won't be accepted, and then they've changed. And I think sometimes it's maybe junior females in the business have been trying to push up, and the senior males decided to replace. The trend that we're seeing is that there's been from D&I programs that are in there, the supporting women programs and what it may be. Some of the big US corps who are in the country have dropped out. There is hardly anyone talking about Black History Month anymore. There's hardly anyone changing their logo for Pride. And actually individuals in those companies that have championed it for so long are now quite silent, and I think actually there's quite a lot to say about that. So we're seeing a digression on it, and yeah, we hold strong on it. I would also just add on the political bit as well. From a working class background, I can actually understand this kind of rise in reform that's come through. For myself, I had to move to London for a job opportunity, and everyone else in where I'm from, all of my friends are working minimum wage jobs. They've got the same ambition as me, but there's just no opportunity around there. And I think some of the D&I language, it's directed kind of to push people away that are maybe in that background. I think we need to start really engaging with that demographic. So instead of just saying, oh, it's a toxic kind of vibe around it of, oh, you must be this, you must be that. Actually, we need to properly engage with them and bring them into that D&I piece of, look, this is about, for me being from a working class northern mining town, I think I should be included in that part of where's the opportunity for you. And there's a big piece around that, I think, to tackle the political rise.
Thank you. Thank you for all of those comments. Incredibly interesting. On the kind of more optimistic side, we're in a trough, but some sort of peak will come at some point. But we are actually seeing real impact, particularly in terms of US companies. And that was incredibly kind of stark data in terms of 41% of men thinking it's gone too far in terms of ones you've interviewed. Oh, they haven't seen anything yet. Yeah. Right, so thank you for that. And you've kind of preempted something I was going to ask about sort of what the long term could look like, because you were sort of talking about what it means in terms of retention, in terms of attracting new people to the industry. So I guess the next question is, what could success look like? And I'd like to come to you, Jo, first.
Success is tricky to quantify, but I think ultimately success would be us not having to have these panels in every conference that we go to. Success would be 50-50 splits in architecture, for example. It's a 50-50 split in colleges, but then as soon as women get to a certain age, a lot of them drop off. I think that's probably the same in engineering. So how are we supporting our female colleagues to have a long career in the industry is really that getting more women in senior positions and getting them to stay there. I think a lot of the problem is you get senior women then tend to get given the business development roles and the HR roles, and especially in SMEs. If you're a senior woman, you are dealing with the humanity of the business. And they think, I was on a board of an industry thing, and all the problems that happened at events or whatever were always given to me to solve. It was never seen as the man. No men on the board would ever think twice about trying to solve an issue. That it was always given to me, which was one of the reasons why I eventually resigned, because I was exhausted with it. And I think it would be just nice for men not to feel so threatened by women to want to do well. We're not trying to take over their spot. We're just trying to have an equal crack at it. And success would just be everyone to be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more, like calm down.
Sorry.
I think I just wanted to, I'd love to add to that and say I think that success is people having more empathy. Yeah. Because ultimately, whatever we're discussing around diversity, diversity for women is very different to diversity for accessibility, for ethnicity, for many other topics, because actually people with different abilities in these other areas are minorities, and that's a slightly different aspect, whereas when it comes to gender, it's pretty much 50-50, so we should expect a real split there. But I think with all of these things and all the wonderful ways we can be diverse, it's really just about empathy and understanding each other. And that's why I often go back to this idea of cultural intelligence, of actually being comfortable with our biases, being comfortable around saying, okay, maybe I do have some bias around this. And there are so many things that all of us hold bias around, and it's completely okay. But I think as soon as we are aware that we hold that, then our actions can be a lot more considered. Conscious, exactly. Whereas we almost go along in life making many decisions all the time without having that consciousness, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. But as soon as we start to be conscious of them, I believe most humans are good deep down and that they want to do the right thing. It's just often not knowing how, and sometimes not even knowing how to be more conscious. So I think it's a bit of education that we all need.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one of the things I often say in my sessions is you are all going to get it wrong. You all have biases. I remember doing a talk to a bunch of lawyers and all shook their heads at me going, no, I don't. No, I don't have any biases. You absolutely do. It's part and parcel of being human. It's something that's kind of quite deeply wired into us. But it can be very, very difficult to accept, and people think it's the worst thing in the world if someone, says maybe there's a bias here, something like that. Thank you so much for those comments. Would anyone else like to come in on that one?
I was actually going to comment on one of the tools that I think is really helpful is mentorship. So that communication channel and opening it up between all different generations within the workforce, in particular reverse mentorship, because what you think your lens is can actually be can be completely wrong. And in an environment that's quite relaxed where you are open to learning, you can really gain a huge amount. And these types of techniques have been learned from Greeks, and then you go into everything, it's in our history. So sometimes it's just industrialising a mentorship program from the top to the bottom of the organisation is a huge opportunity of learning.
Well, I just wanted to just add or slightly put my sort of slightly contrary position from what Joe said about perhaps if success will be less of these panels. I think success should be more of these panels, or just having panels in less of panels about sharing sort of war stories and sort of trauma bonding about what's wrong with the issue, but more about, okay, these are the things that we have learned and this is the things that we're taking forward. We're talking about the zigzaggy line to the upward trajectory. I think that's where what success looks like. And like was said, more and more men in different sectionalities participate in the conversation or participate in the sharing of the ideas. And then if you think about the intersection of white working class men, which is an issue that's been growing. I think I remember reading this article, I forget where it was now, about which came out post the local elections, about there's an issue with issue with dignity in sort of working class towns, and that hasn't been addressed in any meaningful way. And the angst and the fear in the erosion of people's dignity in the northern towns in the UK comes out in the frustration, comes out in misogyny, comes out in racism, and perhaps there is not quite a silver bullet, but instead of chromium bullet, to address the dignity or lack thereof that have been evaporated over 40, 50 years in these towns, and how do you gain that dignity back?
Interesting, thank you. Go to Joe and then to Lee.
Sorry. So just to pick on Emma's point about mentorship, and it reminded me of something I learned a good few years ago. I went to a talk, and it was a person who her career hadn't progressed at all. And when she had a review, they said, "You've not been going out networking anymore. We're quite worried about you. What's going on?" And she said, "Well, I'm part of the LGBT community. People ask me, what does my husband do? And so every time I go to an event, I have to come out. You don't come out once in your life, you come out every time you go out in public. And I'm so tired, and I don't know if I can do this anymore. I haven't got any support." And the company that she was working for, and I think it was Gardner Theobald, so round of applause to them, they asked all their senior management team who were in the LGBT community if they would be willing to set up mentorship programs for people coming through their company. And so they did. So they made their LGBT people in senior position very visible, which gave a brilliant mentorship program, and then everyone felt supported and safe. And I just think more of that, please.
I've got way too much to say. So bringing the point around mentorship can be powerful. Reverse mentorship can be really powerful when it's structured and when the individuals involved understand how to be an effective mentor. I've seen both good and bad. To add to that, sponsorship is incredibly powerful. And I think we tend to under-index on sponsorship. I see a lot of women being mentored, not that many women being sponsored. Mentorship is good. Sponsorship is effectively rocket fuel for careers and really helps support the fact that there's still significant barriers and gender bias in workplace systems that women are having to navigate on a daily basis. I think the point around empathy is really important. Obviously, a lot of our work is getting men to consider openness, vulnerability, courage, and getting them to think about how they actually become a bit more aware and self-aware of how they navigate the world. Because lots of the things that happen to women are actually not intended, and opening the awareness around that. But we do live in a world where everyone has an opinion and not everyone has empathy. So it's navigating that. So the point of what success is, less panels from my perspective, more of the crunchy, real work of tackling workplace systems that are biased. Everyone has bias, like we said. If we didn't have biases, we'd all be dead. So anyone who says we don't, we have over 200, and shortcutting those processes means that we've got the energy to eat, to sleep, and to do the things we need to keep ourselves alive. But that doesn't mean that there's been a lot of unconscious bias training. Not much has changed. There's not been a company be able to tell me the difference it's actually made tangibly. So much of our work is around organisational structures. How do we do it?
Thanks so much, Lee. Stephen, and then we're going to move on to another question.
Thank you. I just want to pick up actually on Nathan's point, and all credit to UKREiiF. You have been advocating these diversity measures right from the get-go, so all credit to you, my friend, right from the start. But I'd like to pick up on the point there about change, which I think hooks into the whole idea about fear and how the rate of change that we're experiencing at the moment is clearly unprecedented. There's a Google futurist who I think at this stage is in his 80s, Ray Kurzweil, and he's observed that we entered the 1900s literally on horseback and left with the bleeping modem in the corner of the room, and that was 100 years worth of progress. And in the first 10 years of this century, we've experienced the same amount of technological progress, and it's only accelerating. And what that means for us as a society, and certainly in the workplace, brings with it a huge amount of change and uncertainty. And I think big chunks of established what had been perhaps coronation through into a certain career with certain expectations and certain levels of entitlement has changed. And that brings with it fear and anxiety, which others prey on and feed off and foster. And that's something that we've got to fundamentally address by telling these much more positive stories and offering people hope and optimism as to what this change can bring.
Absolutely. And speaking of change, the next series of questions that I want to ask is about what we're seeing in terms of a change of approach, a change of language. We're seeing companies talk maybe a bit less about EDI or DEI, that kind of thing, as that sort of language has been weaponized. Do you feel that this is a sign of progress, a sign of the kind of evolution of the topic, or is it a barrier to making change, this kind of fragmentation and change of language? Sam, come to you first.
Ooh, could go both ways on this. I think it depends on the situation. I do think changing the language is at times becoming a barrier. I think people we've still got those traditional fears about speaking up about things that happen that you see that are not correct in your work environment. And I think it's on all of us to make sure that we're still making sure that language is we are talking about sponsorship and mentoring, but working with people to feel like, let them feel like they've got a voice. Can I just touch on one of the things with sponsorship? I just wanted to make a point about everybody here today is in a really privileged position because you're all here. And your teams aren't here. You're here as an advocate for your company and for the work that you've put in. So if you take nothing away from today, I'd really like you to make sure you go out and find a younger teammate. If Teams has made the construction industry so much more available to training our younger teammates, but we're still seeing people turning their cameras off and the younger kids having to sit there, I say kids, that was a bit funny, the younger people having to sit there and work their little socks off whilst we're having meetings and talking around them, and that's inclusion. But go out and give them something that they can add to the meeting, help build their confidence, because you guys are here, you have a voice and you can give a voice to somebody else. So.
Wonderful.
Thank you. That's my soapbox.
A nudge for action. Thank you for that. Going back to this thing around language, I'd really love to hear your thoughts, Emma, about how we can use language maybe more powerfully, what it means to change the language.
Well, I mean, I'm from a marketing communications background, and so my language will shift depending on what we're trying to achieve. And I think we have to be accepting that different audiences hear things in different ways. And if there's a job to do and there's a goal that we need to get to, shifting our language can help that. That doesn't take away from the need to have some form of framework that works, but if the end goal is to have more diversity of thinking and to really address some of the challenges that's affecting them, I will change my language to get there. And I think going back to the point on sponsorship, it's that combined together. Like, if you bring me to the table and then you don't back me when I'm there, it's such a challenge. I need the help all the way through. But there is almost that vulnerability you need to have in mentorship and sponsorship to say, actually, I might be there, but I can't, I'm exhausted, as you were saying.
Just to the point around white working class men, I've done some research around the fracturing of identities based on deindustrialisation. So I'm from a northern estate, and there are hundreds of thousands of men who dreamed of their future careers. They did what they did at school, but they were going to be what their dads, their granddads and their great-granddads were. That was all taken away. And still to this day, that's not really been remedied. And now we're in a world of really rapid change. Those fractures are bigger, because we used to be in a place where there was like 9/11 and then 5 years in a recession and then 5 years in austerity. Now, every 6 weeks there's a crisis.
Yeah.
We are in a world where the instability is significant. So we're living in a world of change. And then the language aspect, again, what we've got to consider is who weaponizes the language that we use on one side, and hold that truth. Because words are now being weaponized by people intentionally to shut down conversation and silence those who are marginalized. So in some ways we need to hold it. But on the other side, we need to appreciate that actually language can be a real distraction of the actual work of making systems and cultures that are better for people. And if we get stuck in policing the language, we don't end up doing the bloody work that needs to happen. So I think it's really important that we focus on those two truths, that it's being weaponized intentionally, but we need to actually hold. And the final point on that is, in a lot of my work, obviously sit there with men who think it's a load of what nonsense. Listen to them, don't judge them. What you actually get down to is they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, and they don't think it's fair. What does DEI exist to do? Value everyone, hear everyone, and make things fair. That's some shared language we can all get behind.
I agree absolutely with all of that. And I think where I go back, so I come from a background of social, I've always worked in social impact, so it's social sustainability, working in terms of inclusion, I've always pushed forward on that. I really noticed a difference. I do think language is powerful and important, but I really noticed a difference sort of post-global financial crash. And I think so it's the types of communication. So when that happened, if you look at the front pages of newspapers, absolutely everywhere. Before that, you would never have had newspapers like the Telegraph or the Mail or talking about boardroom revolts, talking about disgust at big businesses, thinking in that way. And that crisis really shifted the way you saw mainstream coverage and how big business was viewed. And that happened at the same time as the rise of social media, which really shifted how we were using and how we were gathering information, reading information, and shifted dialogues inside and out. And I used to always say to my team, so I had a big team I built over the years, and I'd always say to them, it's going back a few years, our job is to do ourselves out of a job. We are in a job between you. That was our mantra. And I disagree with that mantra now. I think actually, I don't think that job will ever go away or that focus. I think sometimes it's more embedded, but you always need a focus because all of the communication methods that we're using now are not going to be around in 10 years. They're evolving quite rapidly. So I think we constantly need to think that way, and we need to change the messaging. We need to think ahead and not be taken by surprise when this happens. We need to think ahead and think it's going to change. So what are the messages that we want to get out? Who is not in the room? Who is not engaged? Let's stop regurgitating the same conversation with the people who are interested. How are we going to actually think differently and go? And that this is our strategy. This is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to go about doing it.
Yeah. Really interesting. So a few things in there in terms of how rapidly technology is changing communication, the idea that we can use communication to do what it is that we want to affect and the impact that we want to make. We don't have to be the victims of it. We can actually kind of take control of it and be thinking ahead. And a few things in there about the sort of next generation. And the ways in which the current language around EDI might be excluding or making people feel that they are excluded from the conversation. Yeah, I can see some nodding there. Did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking about my suggestion that I've been working in my head about changing the language or getting more people bought into a language of diversity and inclusion. And I always come back to like sort of pop cultural moments through like TV and film and theater. We need to spend a little bit more cultural capital on that as to like how we want to organize society. And I still think there's power in, the cultural things that we do, which is perhaps theater and the arts, movies and TV. Because I remember, again, reading something about one of the shows that I really, really love, White Lotus. I don't know if anyone who has watched White Lotus. It's like a sort of like whodunit type thing, but it's about rich people who go to like fantastic resorts in sort of modeled on the Four Seasons, and every time a new season comes out, the location where the White Lotus was filmed, like, increases in visitors, like, I don't know, I can't remember what the margin was, like 10, 20-fold. Lots more people go to, when it was filmed in Italy, like tons and tons of people went to Italy for holiday. Why? They sort of related to the popularity of the White Lotus TV show. And I think there, if you think about that, there's agency in showing and using the messages from TV, film, to talk about how we want to organize society, and people can learn from osmosis when their guards are down, to understand that being nice to the intersectional people who are social, economic, or from a different background to you, really, there's no harm in that.
Interesting. So using popular entertainment to sort of reinforce some of these messages about respect and fairness and how we treat each other, empathy, am I getting that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
I must see this White Lotus. It sounds like my kind of show.
Yeah, watch it. It's really
Sounds
good.
good. Joe?
This is to cross both points, actually. So when I have two children in their 28 and 31, 31-year-old works in media literacy, 28-year-old works in CSR. And when adolescence came out and everyone was talking about adolescence, I started having a big conversation with my son. And then at the same time, we're on it's called a beers chat group. I won't go into it, but it's quite nice. And a lot of my son's friends are on the same chat group. And one of his friends was saying really inappropriate things. And I was like, what is happening with Josh right now? Let's call him Josh. What's happening with Josh right now? And he just said, oh, he's going through a really rough time mentally, and he's just a bit bombarded with everything, and he is buying into what is being fed to him. And I said, what do you mean what's being fed to you? You're all in your late 20s. Surely you're not at that. And he sat me down and he showed me his Instagram timeline, and I was horrified what he is being fed. And he's like, I don't follow any of these people, and no matter how many times I block, they're coming up all this, and it's clear there's a lot of money from the right wing that goes into social media to drive certain ways of thinking towards young men of all colours and classes, I think, isn't it? And I was absolutely horrified. And I said, "What? How are you normal? How are you normal? And you're getting fed this all day?" And he says, "We just have to learn. It's really hard. We just have to." He said, "But all it takes is a little mental health crisis, a bad day, and you're right in this. People are saying the things that you kind of want to hear that makes you feel like a big man."
Interesting. So we've got both sides. There's a kind of what's already happening, what we may be noticing almost a bit too late because the tidal wave has already hit us. The opportunity to kind of use popular entertainment, it might be TV shows, it might be Instagram, whatever, to actually change that narrative. I could see Lee twitching in his seat, saying, oh, we've done some research about that as well. But I'm also thinking about, as an industry which at the moment is majority male, so that generation is coming into our workplaces on our sites, and the impact that might have. And I'd be interested to hear, let's start with Lee, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so obviously the social impact side of my business looks at tech facilitated harms, looks at the algorithms, and we have one side that looks and works with 11 to 16-year-olds to understand how they're navigating the technological landscape, what they think about relationships, friendship spaces. There's a lot of sensationalism, adolescence, Louis Theroux's Manosphere documentary. In some ways, it's not as bad as it seems. I did that project over 7 months and actually came out more hopeful than I did when I went in. What I will say is it's very clear that over the past 10 years, there's been a structural shift to put content to men. We're talking young men, boys. We live in completely different content bubbles, but a lot of that content is telling them they need to be relentless, rich, and ripped. Every single day, telling them they have to be a certain way. And that it just erodes the self-confidence, which then manifests in lots of other ways. And you don't select that. We're finding young boys hitting that kind of content within like 11 minutes of being online. And we're currently doing an experiment to see if that's got even quicker in the current landscape. Now, what does that mean for our workplaces? Well, the truth is, we tend to see some of the big things that happen, some of the words in employment tribunals, some of the really big things. I'm more concerned over how some of this messaging, especially around how it frames women as objects, as less than, just gradually seeps into people's psyche and then turns up in the workplace in insidious and ways that we don't necessarily see as really overt discrimination, but the covert assumptions. And I suppose just to bring it back to a point earlier around why do I want less panels? Because panels are a very visible artifact of what we do. The problem is this tends to appear in the assumptions that people have and does start to even creep into the unspoken values in the way that businesses operate. And that's kind of my concern in my work, is that is starting to float in. And whether that is a construction organisation asking me to come in to see their apprentices because they are speaking to female directors like they are a cartoon on the internet, and the Equality Act doesn't really like that. Or whether it's, organisations actually saying we're more concerned for the younger people coming in than we are for the supposed dinosaurs who get a lot of considerations for how they've not changed.
Interesting. Stephen?
I feel punch drunk after that story. That's awful. Yeah. However, I don't think ultimately those strategies lead to a richer and fuller society, and therefore I don't believe that they're actually commercial strategies that endure at scale. And I think an example of that is, let's look at wind and solar generation. So the pivot in America in the last few years under Trump has been away from or towards fossil fuels and sort of reducing tax incentives. Quite a few of the measures that Biden had put in place to support regenerative electricity and energy, solar, wind, tidal, and so on. And what's been really interesting, when Biden invested and chose to invest in this industry in the States in the pursuit of those goals, it was quite often the marginalized working class fractions and communities in America that were benefiting from those investment strategies. And it's now quite interesting to see how those societies are resisting some of the fossil fuel-led arguments that are coming through. And it'll be really fascinating to see what happens in the November midterms, which are, can't come around in some respects fast enough to get a temperature check on that. In case you didn't notice, I'm an out-and-out optimist, so there's none of these words that are going to ultimately dent what I think the path we should pursue. In addition to that, I would add that what we have seen as a result of a lot of those policies in the States has been a major investment in European regeneration technologies and industries, the highest level in the last 6 months since 2021. So the horrendousness of things like the war in Iran has put fuel security and energy security much higher up the agenda. And I think that plays back into the language point as well. So we're not doing it in the pursuit of what might be perceived as a net zero goal. This is actually about having our own destiny in our own hands, and therefore not having to rely on volatile third parties in our everyday security.
Great point. Never waste a crisis. I think I didn't really sell this chair very well. So I'll just remind you as audience members that you can join us on the panel if you wish to. Oh, we got someone who wants to join us. That's so exciting. So please take a seat. And I'm going to bring Nathan in for any comments on this section, sort of thinking about the next generation, thinking about language. Any comments you'd like to add here?
I remember reading a book called Invisible Women, where the unbiased consciousness was just so clear. So it's almost like if I saw on TikTok that women were more likely to die in a car crash because men design cars. But like the messaging needs to be much clearer around that comms piece.
It's the height of the seatbelt.
I think that was it. Yeah, it's. I say my mind's gone blank with how much was in that book, but yeah, it's a very good book. But it really just puts into the concept, and I think there's so much about us kind of trying to decipher that together. But actually, I think we just need to go back to really basics on the communication piece. People need it just to be in front of them as a really quick. Oh right, that actually is. I'm unconsciously biased because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd push on that piece.
Hello, my name is Aidira Smalova, and I'm currently studying in Manchester School of Architecture. And as well, adding to that, I've been working in industry in real estate as a PR manager since very young age. I was freelancing and then got into that field, and that's basically where most of my desire in terms of construction, architecture, and real estate came from. And adding to everything that's been said, I would say the most important thing I'll probably look into is the language, just because since I arrived to UK, which was 4 years ago, it's always felt like among my peers there was always like a FOMO, so like fear of missing out, and I believe that was driving young individuals a lot, especially when we say, oh, there's not many people are being accepted within the industry, so it's kind of creating that sense of competition, which is not necessarily healthy. And I always believe there is sort of collaboration over the competition, and sort of trying to build up the team instead of trying to gatekeep and keep things away from each other. And I just feel like that's sort of the right way of using the language. So it's not about who is chosen, but it's like who else to be heard, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So who holds the pen? Who has a seat at the table? And it's much more about the kind of collaborative, bringing people together than who's been chosen.
Even like the presence of me right now here.
Yeah.
I'm a first year bachelor degree.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I feel like although I'm young, I still been given an opportunity to attend and even sit at the panel. And I feel like that's fantastic because I'm in the UK just because I actually got a scholarship eventually and I got into, you know, like Oxford College and things like that. So it's just, I guess, like, it's just being a woman and like, you know, kind of like was given a voice, as you
Yeah.
said. And I just feel like I've never stopped talking after that.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being our first person to come up and sharing your story. That's amazing. That's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks very much. Right. Let's talk about what we can do about some of this stuff. So we're talking more systemic change. And when we're looking at the infrastructure of our businesses, we're often talking about leadership and policies and processes and culture. But I'm quite interested in hearing from the panel and anyone else who also wants to join on the chair. What do you think has the most sort of leverage? Is it a mixture of all of those? Is it something else completely entirely? And I'm going to go to my namesake, Dana, first.
Yeah, so I think it's a mixture of everything, right? So policies are important because they do establish standards, and it's not just about that though. We have to move beyond this and look at action as a driver for change. And not only action, but accountability. Accountability is super important when it comes to measuring you know, everything, but when it comes to EDI. And then also, as another piece to that, there's the data. So being sort of a black woman in architecture, we're very few and far between.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the data is very broad. It's useful, but it can often flatten sort of our experiences. And there's a lot of diversity when it comes to how we move through this. You know, navigate our profession, our culture. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand how different groups experience progression and culture within the profession.
Thank you for that. So a shout out definitely for accountability, but really thinking about what those metrics are. So right at the beginning, we were talking about what success could look like. But if you're not sort of measuring in some way, quantitatively, qualitatively, or some other way, then how do you know that you actually make an impact? Yeah, those are really good points. Thank you, Dana. And we have Sana.
Yep, I have a couple of things. I actually want to start with something positive because in terms of change, actually have seen a lot of policy change. If you think about the building regulations, the way that they used to accommodate women's toilets, that's changed. Now there's a higher percentage of space that has to go to women's toilets because we need more of them. So new buildings have thought about that, and that's happened in kind of the past 10 years.
Yeah.
Other changes around temperature, environment within buildings, they are changing. And I part-time work in local government for a local council. And honestly, the discussions that we have are, oh no, we don't have this in enough accessible languages. We only have 3. Why don't we have 10? Because actually there's loads of diversity in the borough. And these are the conversations we're having. We're not having these conversations of, oh no, you know, there's not enough diversity as much. I think there has been a lot of progress in these kind of bigger ticket items.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is actually the everyday experience. It's not necessarily, you know, oh, we don't have things in place to look after people. It's actually, you know what, I sat at a table with loads of people and I explained what it's like to be from that part of London, and you think buildings should look like that there, but that's not what local people want, and then you get ignored because actually everybody else doesn't think that, and you're a minority. And you know what, I'm a minority and I'm always going to be one in this country, and that's also absolutely fine. We have to then navigate that too. But it is a two-way process, and I think that you know, when you're a minority, you are very conscious that you don't look like everybody, but that's normal as well because that's how it is. And I think that it's really important, whichever aspect of your identity you're thinking about, that we're all conscious of that as well. That you know, and often our identity is shaped by context. When you're the only woman in the room, you think about how you're a woman. When you're the only, you know, person of a certain age, you think about that. And I think from personal experience now, I've tried to focus on commonality. Actually, what do I have in common with everybody in the room? And use that as a way to bridge. Because I also recognise not everybody is good at necessarily finding that commonality, and sometimes we just do have to do a bit more work. And I think that there is a little. I personally have a bit of acceptance over that now, and that's made life easier for me. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear what other people say.
No, absolutely. Would you like to add something? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We're just having our 6 panelists join us. But Anna, you go ahead.
Just building on that, I think I completely agree with that. And I think, but there's something in, if I think back to myself and my journey, and so, you know, I was the first in my family to go to university. And when I went to university, I was suddenly, I left London, I went up to Manchester, and I was surrounded by lots of people who had generation been to university from a very different socioeconomic background than mine. I had such a chip on my shoulder about it. I felt so out of place. I just remember being asked where did I school? Where did I ski? You know, all these, I don't how, and I just remember thinking, I don't fit in here. And it took some lived experiences for me to find that commonality within the room that I was in. And so I think we also all have a responsibility to recognise that with the people around us, to reach out and connect with people and just be aware of that, our roles, each and every one of us, in terms of the networks we create, the support we create, to always remember that, because it takes sometimes a bit of a journey to get to that point, that's all.
Yeah, so this isn't, to a certain extent, there's been some talk about systems, but actually people are talking about those interpersonal interactions, about connection, about engagement, about commonality was a word that I heard several times. So that's interesting, that it isn't necessarily about perhaps leadership and those sort of much bigger things. We've been joined again by an audience member. Thank you so much for joining us. What would you like to add?
So when I walked in earlier, I said it was good to be. I felt immediately I was in a room of like-minded people, so thank you. Just a couple of things really. I'm now partner at a law firm, but you know, if you told 8-year-old me that, I'd have been like, oh, wow, how do you even get there? Working class girl living behind my dad's shop, you know, first gen to uni, all of that. Never feeling like I was quite saying the right thing, but always saying too much probably. I just wanted to say a few things about what everyone on the main panel has said, sort of what's kept me going to get where I am today. First of all, allyship. You know, those of us of a certain gender, a certain class, a certain colour, we're always the ones pushing the EDI. I'd like that to change. Obviously, we've got that lived experience, but allyship is amazing. So I think that's really important to me. The second thing that's got me to where I am is sponsorship. Do you know that there's someone in that boardroom that's thinking of you? And it's not always the case. You don't have to be in the room to be represented. Is it that the people that are in the room are thinking of you? That's really important. I can't remember any other things. Oh, just very quickly on the whole piece of work that you're doing around young men, feeling, you know, white working class men. You know, I'm from Yorkshire, I'm from Huddersfield. I get that. My son is 20 and a lot of his friends feel like that. But I think the problem we have is we've got young black men feeling like that. We've got my son, young brown Muslim man, feeling like that. You know, he feels like he's been pushed by Rochdale, you know? You all know what I mean. So that people look at him and view in a certain way. So I think it's really, really hard, and I think that's the problem with EDI, isn't it? There is so much intersectionality that every time you veer towards trying to tackle one thing, someone else is feeling left out. But we've got to work to try and make it as inclusive as we can. And that was everything I had.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, brilliant. We have an amazing panel, and I think I'd like to throw it open a little bit, just in case there are any questions from the audience. No question? I have a question here. Do we have a roaming mic? Or shall I? Roam.
Do you need I can project?
No. We will not strain your voice. We won't do that to you. What's your
Hello,
name?
Richard Grove. Hi, everyone. RWDI. I saw Anna on a panel recently, and I promised that I would say the wrong thing publicly. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say the wrong thing in a independent way. But one thing I've observed over the last 20 years of work is a significant shift. I want to put this in the context of the gender. It is a not so decent shift in me and my peers trying really hard all the time to find all the ways in which we can get better, genuinely. And feeling sometimes like we are screwing it up or being told that we're screwing it up. Each time we make a small step, it feels like we're being told, no, we did that wrong. There's a sort of sense. And my example of life is my father and mother. That's what I draw example. My father's 90, so he's from a whole different generation. My mother's passed away, she was elderly as well, she's from a whole different generation. So I'm coming to the question. Do we feel like we've shifted the expectations of each gender? So it goes both ways, because there's a great expectation on both genders to change. But actually, have we, in amongst that, acknowledged perhaps where everyone's coming from and giving them the tools, giving people the tools to try and get better? Because I'll speak from personal experience, I've listened and muddled. Listened and muddled.
Yes.
And that's the best that I've tried. So, thank you. That's my question to the panel.
Thank you, Richard. So an interesting one there in terms of the tools and whether people feel that perhaps they're supported enough for making those changes. And let's go to, thank you, Joe first.
So it's a really interesting point that when the world kind of shut down a bit and we were all in our homes, it wasn't all negative. I think it was a very good point at which we started thinking about different things and the way different people live and different genders and identities and sexualities, everything. All that seemed to come to the fore really, really, really quickly. And that's a brilliant thing. But at the same time, so I'm in my not far from retirement age, and I'm not going to say, and I'm quite on board with it and know the language and blah, blah, blah. But I have got it wrong occasionally. I've used the wrong terminology occasionally. And what my fear is when some people shout you down, rather than going back to the empathy thing, rather than shouting us that we're wrong, tell us why we're wrong and what is right and how can we address that. Because every day is a school day. Changes have never come so quickly as they have been in the last 5 or 6 years. And I think everybody needs to identify that there are people in society where the same thing we've been plodding along for 50, 60 years without any change. Then all of a sudden this societal shift for the good has happened, and we might get it wrong and we might get the language wrong. And that doesn't mean that we're bad people. It means that we've just have this ingrained language within us that isn't right. And sometimes we slip up and we make a mistake. And I think that was quite a hard lesson. So you're silenced sometimes because you don't want to say the wrong thing. But I think you need to be wrong and strong sometimes, and take the lesson and learn from it.
I think that's such an important point, because I think hearing feedback is difficult. And I can certainly say this as a former architect, and architects can be very, very sensitive people. But part of what we do in our training is to hear feedback, and sometimes we hear it quite harshly. I would say everyone is in a very different place in terms of their levels of resilience in terms of hearing that. And this is something I think that does come up quite a lot, that people feel like, oh, that was way too harsh. We need to be talking about the impact and the action or behavior or language, not necessarily the person. So it's sort of creating a little bit of separation, because we are all going to mess up. We can't be expert in absolutely everything, unfortunately. So yeah, part of that journey is learning how to hear it, but also not necessarily being overly defensive, because that also takes away from the person who said, something happened there. That didn't feel right to me. If it all becomes about you feeling upset, then somehow that's not going to be addressed. So I think that's a really interesting question. Thank you. Were there any other comments from the panel? Oh, I can see some hands going up. Sana, would you like to go first?
I think I also, sorry, I also really liked your question, because I think you touched on a really important point, which is actually things do go both ways, and they should go both ways, because diversity comes in other forms as well. It's also about how you express yourself, the way you communicate, all of these other things. And a lot of the time, you know, it's not always someone going, you got it wrong, and the other person accepts it. That's not communication. That is someone telling them they're wrong. And we need people to come together and understand each other. And I really wanted to give an example of a friend of mine who is Eastern European white man, works for a charity who are very, very female British company. And he got criticised a lot for expressing himself very directly, because that's not a very British or English thing to do. You know, we kind of have to say in a certain way for people to be okay about things. And so he's quite direct. He's Eastern European background and part German. And so a lot of the women got a bit upset at him. And he had a discussion with his manager, and she said, look, people are getting upset with how you're expressing yourself. And he said, look, I take that on board. I also have to be myself, and I have to feel comfortable to be myself. So I'm happy to, you know, change a bit, but in terms of thinking about diversity, I would also like to be accepted for who I am. And if this company and charity really is about that, I would hope that people can accept that too. And she learned a lesson that day. And she said, actually, you know, you're right. And that was I thought that was a really wonderful conversation about two people coming together and figuring out how best to resolve a situation where they accept diversity, but, you know, compromise a little bit of themselves to come together, you know, so.
Sorry, forgot that I only had the one mic. Thank you so much for that comment. Let's go to Muyimwa, and then I think Lee, and then I think that's probably all the questions we have time for. Coming to the end, I know.
Well, I wanted to take it back to the workplace. And last week when I was preparing myself for this conversation panel, I was reading a Substack by Yoni Reichman, someone who I follow on Substack, and he writes these sketches about the future of work. And something caught my eye. He said there's going to be only 4 jobs in the future, or 4 types of jobs in the future. And I think I think I'll say what the 4 jobs are first, and then we can discuss the jobs. And he's more tech, talks more about the tech industry. So just take it with a pinch of salt. The jobs jobs are slop cannons, security people, adults, and hot people. So the slop cannons are the AI jockeys producing content, security people stitching things together and making sure that they are, you know, they work functionally. Adults are the people who put structure and good judgment, and the hot people are the face to interact with. And thinking about the underlying all of that is that there are some core skills that we all need to have in every job, all the 4 jobs, or when they put this together. And I think it's to do with judgment, perception, relationship building, and building influence. And we need a structure within the office, within where we work, give us the ability to upskill in these 4 areas: influence, our relationship building, judgment, and the last one, perception. So that we can, whenever there's an issue, when it comes to the gender, when it comes to anything intersectional, we have the capacity to, have the difficult conversations and navigate it with, the care and that is necessary.
I must admit, I had no idea where that was going.
Yeah.
But I like where it went. The slop, what? No, it's so interesting. So really focusing on those core skills, which will be leadership management, but they're actually the kind of functional skills for almost any workplace, pretty much. We are running out of time, but very quick, one last comment before we invite Anna and Sam to say a couple of closing things. Yeah.
Yeah, so to this gentleman's question, I think, again, there's 2 truths. Firstly, if we look at society, for example, when I was born, women had only just been able to start to withdraw money without the husband or the dad with them. The world has changed massively in the past 50 years. And there's so many women in places of representation where, when I was born, there simply wasn't. There's been massive progress, and the expansion of what women can be is something that's incredibly important, which is why in a current climate where women's rights are being rolled back, there is no silver lining to that. But we also need to consider how men have tried to expand over the past 50 years, and it's just not gone as quick, if we're honest. Men are still trying to expand into caregiving spaces, trying to think about, how to express masculinity in a wider, richer, whole variety. There's just not been the same space and growth, and there needs to be a little bit of compassion for that, but also appreciating that women's lived reality is still incredibly difficult in a lot of different ways. And I think our work doesn't put the onus and emotional labour on women to inspire men into inclusion. It's men thinking about how they can build those skills, knowing that feedback is a skill, both giving and taking, that we simply don't practice at school or in the workplace, but actually being able to create those spaces for people to be safe enough to try, know that the intent is often positive, but also being able to give people enough space to realise the harm that they've caused is so important. And there's a reason why, to Moon's point around future skills, we deliver in the skills around allyship, both the individual accountability for it, leaders' accountability to role model and beat the drum, and organisations' accountability to build cultures that are safe enough for people to learn. Do all those 3 things, and it can make a difference.
Fantastic. Wonderful call to action. I want to thank every single person for being here, particularly our 5th panelist. We've had Sana, Emma, Anna, and Dana. Our amazing core of panelists. We've had Lee, Joe, Stephen, Mayua, and Sam. We've also had people in the background, everybody who's been helping with the tech, our organisers, women in architecture and women in planning. Amazing stuff.